The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and clinical, throwing pale reflections off the glass desk where the papers were neatly stacked. Across from me sat a woman young enough to be my daughter, her glossy hair pulled tight in a bun, her lips pressed into a smile that was more mockery than professionalism. She held the termination letter between two manicured fingers, like she was about to hand me a menu at some mid-range bistro. "Effective immediately," she said, tapping the page with a bright red nail. "The company is moving forward without dinosaurs. You'll need to clean out your desk by Friday, or security will do it for you." She laughed then, a light, careless laugh, as though she hadn't just reduced 22 years of loyalty into a disposable punchline. "My name is Martin Hale. I'm 58 years old, and for over 2 decades I worked as Senior Systems Operations Manager for Braylock Industries, a multinational manufacturing giant that built everything from automotive parts to aerospace components. I started there at 36, a mid-career hire who quickly proved himself indispensable. When systems crashed, I rebuilt them. When supply chain crises hit, I rerouted freight in hours. When others panicked, I stayed calm. I was the steady hand, the one executives called when they needed order out of chaos. For 22 years, I never missed a deadline, never failed a quarterly review, never once gave them a reason to question my dedication. But here I was, in this sterile HR office, being dismissed as obsolete. I studied her face as she slid the papers across the desk toward me. She couldn't have been more than 30. MBA fresh, probably read some article about digital transformation, and thought she was a warrior of progress. Her nameplate said, Kendall Myers, HR Director, though it was obvious she cared more about climbing the corporate ladder than any real duty of care. To her, I wasn't a man who had given nearly half his life to this company. I was just another box to tick. Another problem solved. "Technology moves fast," she said, rehearsed and sharp. "We need people who can adapt. Not everyone can. Nothing personal, Martin. Business is about the future, not the past." The words landed like stones in my chest, but my face didn't change. Years of managing crisis taught me one thing: control your reaction, because the second you lose it, you lose the battlefield. I nodded once, calm, and picked up the pen she'd left beside the papers. My signature scrawled across the page without hesitation, though inside, every stroke felt like betrayal, etched in ink. She kept talking, filling the silence with condescension. Something about severance, about retraining programs, about opportunities elsewhere. None of it mattered. I wasn't listening. My mind was somewhere else, cataloging the details, the way she smirked when she called me a dinosaur, the tremor of arrogance in her laugh, the exact phrasing of moving forward without dead weight. Those details mattered. Words are ammunition, and I was gathering rounds. When it was done, I stood, smoothed my tie, and shook her hand. Her skin was cool, her grip limp, as if she'd already dismissed me from existence. She smiled again, self-satisfied, like she'd just cleared space for something shinier. I gave her nothing in return. No anger, no begging. Just silence. Silence unnerves people more than rage ever could. I walked out of her office with my head high, past the cubicles, past the glass conference rooms where meetings hummed without me. My desk was the same as always. Family photos, coffee mug, stacks of notes filled with my handwriting. I began placing my things into a cardboard box, each item a reminder of the years I had given them. Co-workers glanced over the walls of their cubicles, then quickly looked away. A few whispered. One man muttered, "Sorry," without meeting my eyes. I didn't respond. Sorry meant nothing. Sorry was the word of bystanders. By the time the box was full, my desk looked naked, stripped of life. I lifted it easily, my arms steady even though my chest felt heavy. Walking to the elevator, I could feel their stares on my back. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said goodbye. Just the squeak of chairs and the hum of air conditioning, like the company itself was swallowing me whole. The doors slid shut in front of me. My reflection stared back. Older, lined, but steady. Calm on the outside, a storm gathering within. The war hadn't started yet, but it would. When I first joined Braylock Industries, I was 36 and hungry. They'd just opened a new division handling aerospace supply chains, and I came in as a systems analyst with a reputation for solving problems no one else wanted. Back then, the company had a different spirit. Tight deadlines, long nights, but camaraderie in the trenches. I mentored younger hires, stayed late to troubleshoot server failures, and held the line when crises hit. While the rest of the staff filed out at 5 to hit happy hour, I was in the operations center, sleeves rolled up, rewriting logistics protocols to keep aircraft parts moving across continents. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real work, and for 22 years, I delivered. I remembered those nights as I carried my cardboard box down the hall, every step pulling me further from the office I'd given my life to. For decades, I had been the man executives trusted in silence. No awards, no speeches, just a nod in the hallway that meant, "We know you saved us again." I trained interns into managers, managers into directors. I watched bright-eyed kids climb ladders I steadied for them, kids who now pretended not to see me on my last day. That was the currency of corporate loyalty. Silence on the way up, amnesia on the way down. The truth was, I'd seen the erosion coming. 2 years ago, little things started to change. Invitations to strategy meetings stopped showing up in my inbox. Systems I had designed were suddenly handed to consultants, half my age. Instead of being looped into crisis calls, I was asked to handle archival work, legacy documentation. They said it was because I understood the old systems best. But the subtext was clear. They were boxing me in, shrinking my footprint until my absence would hardly register. I heard the whispers in the break room, jokes about how my cursive notes looked like hieroglyphics, how I was the only one still sketching workflows on paper instead of tapping a stylus on a tablet. They laughed at my handwriting like it was proof I couldn't adapt, ignoring the fact that those same sketches had kept million-dollar shipments from collapsing. The final insult came when I cleaned out my desk. I expected dust and forgotten coffee mugs, but tucked in the bottom drawer under a stack of outdated manuals, I found a folder someone had meant to shred. Inside were confidential documents, draft contracts with overseas suppliers, notes on an expansion deal in Europe, and partnership outlines with a competitor we were supposedly beating in the marketplace. I flipped through page after page, each one heavier than the last. Any other man might have panicked, but I didn't. My mind clicked into its familiar mode. Gather intelligence, verify, secure. Calmly, I pulled out my phone, photographed everything, and slipped the folder back where I'd found it. That night, after I'd stacked my box in the trunk of my car, I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I stopped by a copy center across town, printed duplicates of every image, and filed them away. Not paranoia, preparation. You don't spend 22 years holding together fragile supply chains without learning the value of contingency planning. They thought I was finished. In truth, I was just beginning. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet for anyone paying attention. But for me, silence was fertile ground. I set up a small office in the back of a storage unit I rented under an LLC no one knew about. From there, I watched. I scrolled LinkedIn, tracking new hires and promotions. I checked press releases, looking for gaps between what they said publicly and what the documents in my possession revealed privately. I traced which executives were suddenly connecting with rival companies, which departments were posting openings that hinted at secret projects. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. Then one evening, the final insult landed on my screen. Braylock had announced my replacement. She was 29, smiling wide in her profile picture, with a headline that read, "Digital native, passionate about disrupting legacy systems." Her bio bragged about how she'd been recruited to bring fresh perspective and modernize outdated practices. I didn't need to ask who fed her those words. The HR director herself had already posted a comment beneath, thrilled to welcome new talent as we cut loose the old guard. The future is bright. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the edges of my lips curling despite myself. They thought this was the end of my story. It wasn't. Game on. The office I rented was nothing more than a converted storage space above a print shop on the east side of town. Bare walls, a single window with a cracked frame, and a desk that looked like it had been dragged out of a high school library. Perfect. I didn't need comfort or prestige. I needed anonymity. No nameplate on the door, no logo on the wall, no sign that anyone worked there. Just me, a laptop, a phone, and the folder of documents I had taken from Braylock. Those papers sat at the corner of the desk, a silent reminder of the arsenal I now carried. They weren't just files. They were weapons, waiting to be sharpened. At home, my wife tried to convince me to let it go. "Martin," she said one night at the dinner table, "you're going to make yourself sick carrying this around. You've worked long enough. Maybe it's time to just enjoy life." I looked at her, at the worry in her eyes, and I understood her fear. But fear was never an option for me. "This isn't revenge," I told her. "It's correction." They crossed a line, and lines have consequences. My friends said the same thing in their own ways. Grab a fishing pole, take a vacation, start consulting somewhere else. They didn't understand. You don't just walk away when someone has taken everything you built and laughed in your face. You correct it. My days settled into routine. Early mornings, black coffee, blinds drawn. I studied the documents with a precision I hadn't felt in years. What looked like ordinary contracts to an outsider told me everything about the company's strategy. Hidden among them were compliance reports, doctored numbers, altered training certifications, and memos about temporary shortcuts that violated safety standards but saved millions in costs. HR had signed off on most of it. Kendall Myers's name scrawled at the bottom of forms that should have gone to regulators. She hadn't just ended my career. She had left fingerprints all over crimes. I didn't storm into offices or make threats. That was the fantasy of amateurs. I picked up the phone and made quiet calls instead. A safety inspector who owed me a favor received an anonymous tip. A regional compliance office got an envelope in the mail with copies of falsified certifications. I opened a secure email account and forwarded contracts to competitors with subject lines like, "Thought you should know." I didn't flood the market. I released information like drops of water, just enough to ripple outward. Too much too soon, and the company might circle wagons. But small leaks? They spread like rumors, unstoppable and corrosive. Weeks went by, and I watched the pieces shift. Braylock executives scrambled to address rumors of compliance issues. A government agency scheduled a surprise audit. A major client froze negotiations over safety concerns. From my quiet office, I tracked it all through news alerts and financial reports. I never raised my voice, never sent a single message from my own name. I was the ghost in their machine, invisible but everywhere, turning their own secrets into knives. One afternoon, as the sun slanted through the dusty blinds, I refreshed a financial ticker on my laptop. For the first time in months, Braylock's stock dipped noticeably. Only half a point, but enough to send a shiver through the market. That wasn't coincidence. That was me. I leaned back in the chair, hands folded, listening to the faint hum of the coffee shop's machines downstairs. A whisper of collapse had begun. Patience, I thought. Timing is everything. The leaks began small, deliberate, and precise. A shipment manifest showing shortcuts in hazardous material handling found its way into the inbox of a regulatory officer I knew was sharp and unforgiving. Weeks later, a set of falsified safety certifications surfaced on an industry watchdog's forum, sparking heated debates about Braylock's commitment to compliance. Each document I released was timed to hit, just as the last tremor faded, a steady rhythm of pressure that didn't allow the company to catch its breath. By the time regulators scheduled a second surprise audit, the story was already spreading in trade journals and whispers at conferences. Competitors didn't have to lift a finger. I was doing their work for them, and they knew it. Clients started hesitating. Negotiations dragged. Contracts that should have been rubber-stamped suddenly went cold. I watched it all unfold from my small office, the financial ticker on my screen painting the slow bleed in numbers. Every dip meant they were scrambling, and I imagined the late-night board meetings, the red-eyed executives snapping at each other while Kendall Myers tried to convince them it was all just noise. They thought they were too big to fail, but I knew better. It only takes a few cracks in the foundation before the whole structure collapses. I tested the waters of visibility one night at a networking event downtown, a glossy affair hosted in a hotel ballroom filled with suits and wine glasses. I stayed in the corner, unnoticed, while the room buzzed with chatter about market shifts and upcoming projects. That's when I saw her. Kendall, the architect of my dismissal, laughing with a group of peers near the bar. She looked radiant, confident, bragging about her success cleaning house at Braylock, boasting that she had modernized a bloated department and cut loose the old guard. She said it like it was her personal victory, like discarding me and others like me was a career highlight. I studied her from across the room, unseen. She carried herself with smug certainty, the kind of arrogance that made people careless. She didn't know the fire creeping up behind her, didn't sense that every laugh, every sip of wine, was borrowed time. I felt no urge to confront her then. The battlefield wasn't a ballroom, and my war wasn't fought with words. I left without a trace, her laughter still ringing in my ears, each note stoking the storm that had been building inside me since the day she called me a dinosaur. Back in my office, I laid out the threads I had been pulling for months. Regulatory investigations were in motion, clients were spooked, competitors had their claws ready, and the financial markets were starting to circle like vultures. It was all converging. Every document I had leaked, every rumor I had sparked, every nudge I had given to people in positions of power. I had picked the date weeks earlier, circled on a calendar pinned to the wall with a thumbtack. That was the day everything would break. The discipline I'd honed over decades of crisis management kept me steady. I didn't gloat, didn't let adrenaline rush me into mistakes. My face stayed calm, but inside, the storm raged hotter, sharper. Every humiliation I'd endured, the smirk across the HR desk, the whispers about my handwriting, the empty stares of colleagues as I carried my box, compressed into a single blade of purpose. The detonation was close, and I could almost feel the vibration of it beneath my feet. That night, the city outside my window glowed with office lights and traffic. people rushing about unaware of the collapse looming over Braylock. I stood, closed the blinds, and let the room fall into quiet shadow. The folder of documents sat within reach, edges worn from my handling, a weapon that had already drawn blood, but still had one fatal strike left. I picked up the phone, dialed the number I had been saving, and waited for the line to connect. When the voice on the other end answered, I said only 2 words. It's time. The first alerts hit my phone before sunrise. Braylock Industries raided by federal regulators. Offices sealed, files seized, executives questioned on site. The headlines rolled across the ticker like artillery fire, each one louder than the last. By mid-morning, the news channels had moved in with cameras, and footage of agents marching into the corporate headquarters was everywhere. The stock plummeted as investors scrambled to unload, each red arrow on the screen a reflection of the work I had done in silence. I sat in my office with the blinds half drawn, the glow of the television washing over me, and let the chaos play out without a word. The collapse unfolded exactly as I had mapped it. Audits uncovered years of falsified certifications and doctored compliance reports. Safety violations hidden under Kendall Meyer's electronic signature spread across social media within hours. Clients who once boasted about their contracts with Braylock issued statements of concern, then severed ties. By the end of the first week, 3 major deals worth hundreds of millions were dead in the water. Board members, those same men who once nodded at me in corridors without a word, were photographed leaving the building with grim faces, phones glued to their ears, as they begged lawyers to contain the bleeding. But no one could stop it. Kendall, the woman who laughed in my face and called me a dinosaur, was escorted from the office in tears. Cameras caught her shielding her face with a folder, hair disheveled, her confidence gone. The same peers she had bragged to at that networking event now watched her fall from grace with hungry satisfaction. She had bet her career on cleaning house, on cutting loose the old guard. And now, the house was burning with her inside it. The lawsuits followed quickly, class actions from clients who had been misled, individual claims from employees who argued they were forced to cut corners, shareholder petitions accusing executives of negligence. It was a tidal wave no one could swim against. Within weeks, Braylock's empire crumbled. The stock was suspended, government officials announced criminal charges, and creditors circled like sharks. Everything I had built and maintained for 22 years was gone. Not because I had left, but because those who replaced me had mocked the very systems that kept the company alive. I didn't shout. I didn't celebrate. I simply poured a cup of coffee, leaned back in my chair, and watched the numbers fall on the screen. Release came not in fire or fury, but in stillness. For the first time since that day in the HR office, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The calm that settled over me was deeper than satisfaction. It was clarity, pure and absolute. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. The final move was mine alone. The last document in my folder was the most valuable, one I had held back until the very end. It contained internal memos outlining a merger strategy with one of Braylock's closest rivals, plans so detailed they could only have been crafted at the highest level. I didn't leak this one to regulators. I sold it. A competitor cut me a check large enough to ensure I would never need another paycheck. When the ink dried on that deal, Braylock wasn't just bleeding, it was finished. I closed my laptop and stood by the window. Outside, the city went on as if nothing had changed. Traffic lights blinking, people hurrying to jobs, the rhythm of ordinary life unbroken. I opened the blinds fully, let the fading sunlight spill across the bare walls of my office, and breathed deeply. The air felt cleaner than it had in months. Betrayal isn't unique, it's ancient. From battlefields to boardrooms, men are discarded the moment they're no longer considered useful. But there are constants in this world: facts, patience, and strategy. Those are weapons that never dull, never expire, never go out of fashion. And when wielded by steady hands, they cut deeper than arrogance ever expects. That was the truth Braylock forgot, and it was the truth that destroyed them.